Now in this demo, I want to show you how you can go a little further with the data sources window. I'm going to slide the data grid that we did in the last demo up to the top so I have some room at the bottom here. And I'm going to expand my overall UI a little bit. I'm going to go back to the data sources window. Now when I did the drag and drop before, we got a data grid because of this selection. It's the default selection that when you do a drag and drop of a given entity type, it's going to generate a data grid for that. You can see there's other options here, including lists. That's going to generate a list view control, which is mostly obsolete at this point by the data grid. And then the one I really want to show here is the details view. If I select details view, the other thing I can do is you can see you have drop-down boxes at the individual property level. And this is where it figures out what kind of column within the data grid or what kind of field when you're doing details it's going to generate. So I can leave most of these to text box, but I can also exclude certain ones by saying none. So I'll exclude a few of these and say that we just want the ID, first name, last name, email, and phone properties to be generated as a data form or details view. Now if I do my drag and drop, you can see that what it generates is a grid or a little data form. Now the ordering of the properties may not be what you want again. It's going to go in alphabetical order by default, but we can move those around later. If we go look at what it generated, first off at the top, notice there's no additional collection view source. It saw that we did a drag and drop of the same exact entity type, and so it just can reuse that same collection view source. If we dropped a different entity type, then a new collection view source would have shown up here. Down below our data grid, it added the root grid that's containing all those labels and text boxes, and it sets up the appropriate column and row definitions to get that nice rectangular layout. Then it basically generates a label based on the property and an input field based on the property. And you saw from those drop downs where the given input field type was coming from. On the appropriate property for that input field, such as text on a text box, it's going to set up a binding. The binding is going to have the path to the property on the data bound object. It's always going to declare the mode two-way for input controls, even though in WPF most of these are two-way by default. It does that so it can have the same design time experience for Silverlight and Windows 8 applications where there is no default of two-way for editable controls. It also puts a couple of additional properties that have to do with validation on here. We'll get to those in a later module. So you can see it just sets up a label and input for each of the properties that you had selected that you wanted to generate input for, and puts them all in a parent grid nicely laid out. Now if you wanted to start reordering these, maybe you wanted ID, then first name, then last name, you could just drop in here and start tweaking the row numbers of the individual controls. And then you'd probably want to move the XAML around as well so that it's in a linear layout in the XAML that matches the way it's laid out on the screen. But ultimately it's the row numbers that drive which grid cell it shows up in. So that shows how you can use the details view of the data sources window to drag and drop and generate a data form. Additionally, you can drag out individual properties. So I could drag out last name here, for example, and we can see it generates a single grid with two columns to it, one for the label and one for the input. And you could drag these out as individual grids on a per property basis if you have some more exotic layout that you need.